Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alt.net May. So please, if you're there, put a comment in the chat so that we know that we're talking to real people before we get into things too much. Let's see. Hey, look, we at least have one or two, three real people. This is pretty good. This is a good start. Looking nice. So we have Ben today on the show, and of course, Francis and me. So we're very lucky to have Ben, who presented at Programmable in the past, and I was really looking forward to seeing his talk, but I didn't have a chance to see it there. But I'm even more excited because I get to see it here. So this is perfect from the convenience, everyone, of your own homes. Sorry, it's not physical this month, but yeah, the Mantle group was booked up, but we do plan to do some physical ones in the future. All right. I have some news here. Alan is a real boy. See the message coming up.
Yeah, I can confirm Alan is real. I've actually met him in person in Melbourne. It's a lovely chap.
This is good. And we've got Andrew here, who I've met in person as well. I know he's a real person. All right, that all looks good. So I think we've had some questions in the past around whether you need a Twitch account to comment, and you do. So if you want to win a prize at the end, then please sign up for Twitch just before we get into the talk, so don't get distracted while the talk's going on. But you can sign up for a Twitch account, and then you can comment, and you can also then comment at the right time to win the prize at the end. So speaking of prizes, oh, thank you, Alan. The prizes are awesome. They are 2 JetBrains licenses to any of the products, even the expensive ones. And you basically just get a voucher that gives you a year of updates, and you can keep using it after that. Or you can come back to the Alt.net user group again and win another one by answering another question after the year and renew your license. So at the end, there'll be 2 questions to win the licenses. All right. Now, I think, how are we going? 7:04. We're probably getting to the point where we should head into the actual exciting talk. So Ben says it's going to be a little bit shorter than some of our previous talks. So on average, I think over our talks, we're going to have it about an hour. But as you know, sometimes some have got a bit longer. So Ben's going to go a bit shorter to even out the length so that we get that exact 1 hour happening. All right. Francis, do you want to do the intro?
Yeah. So I think I had the pleasure of meeting Ben earlier this year during a Programmable. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that we were kind of like first-time speakers. Is that correct, Ben? Yeah. And not only being first-time speakers at the conference, but I think we also happened to speak at the same time. So I never got a chance to really, see Ben's talk. So I think today is much about for my selfish reasons, but I also know that Ben's got an awesome talk lined up for you guys. So yeah, I can't wait to hear what Ben has to say on this interesting subject matter, and I hope you guys enjoy Ben's presentation today. And also, I also want to say Ben's an awesome human being. So.
Thank you, Francis. It was a bit of a shame. I was looking forward to seeing your talk on the day.
Yeah, well, I think there's a recording somewhere. So yeah, I like our talks at Programmable, which is a shame actually. But
actually, we will put the recording of this at the ANZ Coders. So and Francis' talk is there too. So both of you can be together in ANZ Coders.
Maybe I'll put a link to Ben's talk.
Chuck it in the chat, and we can watch it at the end of this one.
That's good. Yeah, just stick it in. So, oh yeah, feel free to comment in the chat as usual, and I'll surface your comments so that Ben can answer them. And I'll try not to interrupt rudely. I'll try and interrupt in between bits that you're saying with the questions from the audience. Can you see the chat, Ben, or
yeah, I can see the chat as well.
All right, so yeah. I'll keep that in mind, and that you're probably seeing it as well. But still surface it. All right, sounds good. Shall we? Do you want to?
Yeah.
We'll get into it. Why not? All right,
Let's get into it.
Here we go. Everyone see Ben's
Fantastic.
presentation up there? Very good. And I'll just put Ben at the top because he's the most important, and take it away.
Fantastic. I have to warn you, I have notifications turned on because that's part of the talk. So if you see anything from Discord pop up, I apologize. But yeah, I'm going to give a talk today on the superpowers of service workers in the browser. I'm Ben. I'm a software engineer, and I work in the front end at Atlassian. I gave this talk back in March on a topic that I was really excited to deep dive into and share with the world. There's a whole world of awesome things you do on the web that aren't explored enough, and I wanted to give people a bit of inspiration to go and add these to your next project. So yeah, also as a heads up, this is a pretty front-end heavy talk, but it's still very relevant. As you can see there, service workers are like a tiny backend running in your browser. So hopefully that inspires a bit of the backend engineer out there as well. So I'm going to be running through a few of the key superpowers that service workers have, and hopefully demystify them a bit and give you some avenues to explore. So you may have heard of progressive web apps before. And what that is it's essentially a set of principles and technologies to enable an experience for the web similar to that of platform-specific apps, such as mobile or desktop applications that you would normally install natively. Service workers are an effort to enable these native-like experiences to be possible, and they're the starting point for features that make the web feel more like native apps. And why is that important? Because websites are significantly more portable than mobile applications. I may have some bias there, but if the same purposes could be served from the web, then that would be pretty great, wouldn't it? Why should you care? Well, anyone been stuck on a train recently? Topical given the questionable conditions. Anyone been on a hike? Would you be confident in loading your messages in Safari or Chrome from your browser in a place like that where you have a patchy network connection? What about sending a message? Chances are, if you're using a native mobile application to do those actions, you'd expect them to work even while you were offline. I personally get very frustrated when I revisit a tab that I previously opened, and because my network is patchy, I now have to stare at a blank screen on the train. That kind of sucks. So service workers are a solution to these problems for the web. They enable a set of experiences that feel foreign, but I personally feel are very necessary given how achievable they are. So what actually is it? I've gone into a little bit, but essentially it's a client-side programmable proxy that sits between your web app and the outside world. It's a type of web worker, a separate script that runs independent of the web app they're associated with. They enable fine control over network requests, handling of push messaging for displaying alerts, and even dispatching of queued actions that the user has made when not connected to the internet. There are event-driven scripts that receive events from actions on your site or from the browser itself. They can receive these events even when the user is not active on your site, such as in the background or closed. This technology allows for a consistent experience for your users, regardless of what is happening on their device. And I believe that every site on the internet needs to have a service worker, regardless of whether you consider it a progressive web app or not. They have just as much use serving cached content from a server-side rendered news application as they would the shell of a heavily interactive client-side app. So, what makes these experiences possible? Well, the superpowers of service workers, of course. So today I'm going to introduce you to 3 of the key functional events that enable a variety of these experiences that aren't as common as they should be. And I'm hoping that I inspire you to try and include some of these in your next app. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the first superpower. Fetch, enabling offline first experiences. So Fetch is the kind of a superstar of the service worker world. It's what enables offline first web pages. It allows them to act as a proxy for traffic to the outside world and replay cached content when the outside world is a bit too far to reach. Imagine back to the scenario of you reading a news article on the train. You close your browser for a moment, check a message, and come back to your article, only to find that the page has refreshed and what you're reading is now a blank screen. I mean, this is partially Fire's fault, but still, boo, that kind of sucks. The fetch event gives you a way to prevent that from happening, where you've dropped out of the experience. The two most common strategies that people implement on the web for the fetch event is pre-caching your site and replaying it from the cached content, or falling back to an offline version when the site isn't available. You aren't limited with how you want to chop and change these strategies. Any combination of them can be used and tailored to your app's needs. A fetch event is received by the service worker anytime that the main website makes a network request. This includes fetching any HTML files, JS bundles, or even XHR requests in site or loading image assets. Fetch has a powerful sidekick that's often used in tandem with fetch, which is the cache API. With this, it allows for programmatic control over how your content is cached. You can decide to only replay images or only the shell of your application, and prevents you from needing to make round trips to fetch heavy JavaScript bundles when they haven't been updated. I've got up on the screen an example of one of these events. So on this one, very briefly, I know it's hard to read these on slides, but essentially it's checking to see that the fired event, if that fired event has already been cached, to replay that instead of playing it back, instead of making that request. And if it hasn't been cached previously, it will then go and make that request and respond with that content. And so these are useful for all sorts of applications. They also have applications in things like mocking for testing on your app. So I guess from our early example, if you were reading a content on the train, close your browser for a moment and decide later, as you enter a tunnel, that you want to keep reading. With service workers enabled on your site, you can be sure that your users can continue to read your site uninterrupted and load the content from the cache. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next superpower, unless there are any questions on this one. No? Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and jump to sync, the next superpower. Sync, make sure what your user sends actually gets to where it needs to be. So background sync is what lets you defer user actions until the user has a stable internet connection. It can enable experiences where your user can be certain that the message they send actually gets to its destination eventually when their device has internet access again. They're particularly useful when the user is offline. Imagine them as a solution to mobile natives equivalent of sending a message without internet connection. You'd imagine if you send a message from your phone, even if it isn't sent immediately, once it has connection, it would send that in the background without you having to make any action. When a sync event is requested from your main app, whenever a user has done an action, once the browser has decided that you have a stable internet connection, it will fire off this event inside your service worker, and regardless of whether or not your app is in focus or not, these sync events they can be used to batch analytics events, or even sending a photo of a cat. When a sync event is requested by your main app, this tells the browser to emit a sync event in your service worker when the browser next has internet connection. Within a sync event, you can read the data that your main thread has set up and forward it to your service now that it is being accessed from your user's device. So similar to fetch, sync also has a sidekick, IndexedDB, which is, for those that don't know, a database in the browser. you can read from it like a queue and dispatch each request individually, marking the item as done, or even updating with a confirmation from your downstream service, so that when your user next opens their site, they can clearly see what actions they've made and whether or not they've been persisted. So I'm going to bring up on screen a simpler example. So this is what a sync event would look like in a service worker, a very simple one. I'm just checking that when I dispatched a sync message event from my app, that I then call the sync messages function. And so this will go pull from index.db and send off those events one at a time, marking them as done as I go through. Oh, sorry about that. So how could this be practically used? Say you're building a website for first responders in an emergency situation that need to be on site and gather information and send it back to base immediately as they get a connection to the internet. They may not be on the most stable of internet connections, and sending data out the place that they are may not even be possible. Well, with a pattern like the background sync in service workers, their data can be queued on their device and can be fired off once they have a stable internet connection. This means that regardless of whether or not they open their site again, when the browser detects internet connection and that sync event is fired, the messages will be sent forward. This is pretty handy for making sure actions get to where they need to be. But what if we wanted to update our users as soon as new information becomes available, so that it be there the next time they visit the site? Well, that's where the next superpower comes in.
Ben, just a quick question. Yeah, how safe is it in the sync, right? If you're putting really important messages in there, are they definitely not going to get lost? Are they definitely going to be processed?
Yeah, so sync is a bit of a trickier one compared to fetch. Fetch is pretty high support across the browsers. Background sync has, as you can see in the top corner, 77% availability. With using this practically, there's a bunch of libraries that Google put together in a package called Workbox. And there's a tool called Workbox Background Sync that essentially handles this background syncing process when your browser doesn't support it. So if you were to enable an experience like this practically, I would recommend building it using something like Workbox Background Sync that essentially just still handles things in a queue, except instead of it working in the background while your device is closed, the next time the app is brought into focus, it will sync those events in a similar sort of way that the service worker would do practically. So of course, if you go and clear your browser content, which wipes out your index.db, when you go to sync those events, they won't be there, but this is the next best thing. It'd be the same as if you send a message on your phone and then you deleted Messenger, and those messages would be lost because you don't have that stored on your device anymore.
Oh, fair enough. That's cool. So it's not a shim, then it's like a separate library that you would call with its own API if you wanted to support Firefox and Safari. Is that kind of the...
Yeah.
Cool.
So essentially you would work in, this is of course a very simplified, purely the API level one, but you would want to implement some backup strategies in case a background sync wasn't available. So you would check to see if it was available before you dispatched a sync request. And if it wasn't, then you would handle that inside of your app, and it would rely on the user reopening it eventually. But yeah, as with all of these sorts of new web technologies, progressive enhancements are still worth the effort if it improves the experience, or at least sets patterns that you want to see have happen.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks.
And in terms of mobile browsers, Android users will be pretty happy to know that it's very much available in Chrome, and on Safari for iOS, it is unfortunately not available, and you would need to use an alternate library to handle that queuing, and the user would need to come and bring the app back into focus. But yeah. So how much of this is available on mobile browsers. A split between Android and iOS. Android and, Cool. All right, I'm going to move on to, just like WASM, if you start using it and eventually it gets adopted, hopefully Apple would take note.
That will be forced to come along for the ride, yes.
Yeah, it took Adobe putting Photoshop on the browser for them to get WASM across the board. So adopting technologies and pushing the vendors is the best way to get them in. But I'm gonna.
Sorry, we've got one more maybe.
Yeah.
Last question before you go on. So Stephen's saying that Apple has deliberately not supported PWAs, or at least I think made them kind of second class. Yes. Do you think this is part of the same thing? A fight for the dominance of the App Store and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So the Apple not supporting PWAs, it's kind of like a half implemented feature in terms of like some of the web APIs that you're expecting. So things like fetch in your service worker will work on Safari, on iOS, as is. Background sync doesn't exist in any form, and push notifications, which is the one I'm about to jump into, exists on PWAs, which can be installed from Safari, but only once they're installed. And so if you were to, say, try and register notifications inside of the browser itself without installing it locally from Safari, it won't be able to send notifications. There's, at the end of this talk, I've also put a QR code with a bunch of useful links to how you go about these workarounds. But essentially, fetch is the key player here, and the other ones you need to handle progressive enhancements and fall back to other behaviors where necessary. Yeah, easy. All right, I'm going to jump into the next one. Oh, and I've done it again. Give me one sec. Cool. So push. Update a user's local cache so it's available when they're next online. So push gets a bit of a bad rap. I'm sure you've come into a website and it's immediately asked you to accept notifications. But today I've intentionally focused on another lesser known piece, which is the fact that you can receive events in the background without having your app open. So push is the event that enables server-emitted events to clients while the app is inactive, which is an insanely powerful feat for the web. You may be, of course, familiar with notifications, but this is more powerful than just that. Imagine being able to push real-time updates as they happen to your end user without needing to rely on a socket connection, polling, or even have the site open. That could be very handy. When a push event is received by a service worker, it activates in the background and can use the content received in the push event to display a notification to the user. In that process, you can also update the cache content in the background of your web app, enabling experience where the content of your site is ready before the user has even opened the page. And just with the other ones, the push event also has a sidekick, which is the notifications API, which is what you use to trigger notifications when an event is received by a service worker. And if you have received any events while off pages, this is the process that is happening behind the scenes. So I've got another event example here. So on this one, I've sent a push event to my subscribed service worker. I pull out the data in here, and I go ahead and update my local notifications so that notification is visible in-app if they go and open it. And then I also call show notifications to set a notification on the user's device. So how could this be practically used? In our scenario of a first responders website, the flow of real-time information is crucial to adapting to risky scenarios. And having the ability to quickly dispatch notifications to people on the ground would help them adapt to situations as they change. Having this content be updated immediately, even if they're jumping between patch connection, means that they can reliably check events as soon as possible. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and demo all this. Are there any questions before I jump into a quick demo?
Maybe not.
Fantastic.
Oh,
I
actually,
take that
I've got
as
one.
a... Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Ben. Yeah, do you happen to know how the push works in the background? Does it use sockets, or is it polling, or like the underlying mechanism?
So from what I understand, it's handled by your browser vendor in a similar way to push notifications for devices. I'm not entirely sure of the full mechanism, but essentially, from at least the perspective of the front-end app, when a user accepts notifications, you receive back effectively a webhook that you then send off to your service to hold on to, which you can then call to fire events off to the user's device. And so there's a whole process. I'm sure every vendor does it differently, but essentially, from your perspective, it's a endpoint new call with the notification content.
Cool.
Cool. All right. So, actually, before I jump into that, so what I'm going to demonstrate now is fetch and its sidekick the cache, sync and its sidekick IndexedDB, and push and its sidekick notifications. So, I'm going to go ahead and open up my first responder website, AlertMate, and I'm going to go ahead and start by setting me in offline mode. Because I'm presenting on a stream, I'm not going to turn my Wi-Fi off like I would if it was a live demo. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear me talk. So I'm also going to go ahead and open up the service worker for my site in a separate tab, just so we can see events when the page is closed. So now that it's offline, I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. You'll see that the site is still loading, be it the images broke because I made some changes at the last minute. I'm going to go ahead and submit a report. So I'm on site and something has gone wrong. There appears to be a seagull uprising where I am currently, and that's just no good. And people need to know about it who are on the AlertMate site. And I'm going to go ahead and say this is a critical severity. I'm going to send off this report. And I've got some logs here to say that a background sync has been requested. And we're skipping fetch because we're offline. And it's go ahead and added it to the sync queue. And just for demonstration purposes, what I've done is added that in here in my IndexedDB. So now I'm going to go ahead and close the site. And what I'm expecting to see is that now that my DevTools toggle to turn this offline is no longer there, the service worker is going to be back online and it's going to go ahead and fire off that event in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And we were lucky. I can actually go ahead and toggle this now in just the service worker. And you'll see that it fires off an event doing a background sync from the service worker itself. And so now if I go ahead and check the site again, that will be pulled out of IndexedDB and sent off. There it is. Cool. And you'll see here, I've received a message from Chrome Canary. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to another browser that I've registered this on. I'm now going to go ahead and chuck this into offline mode before I open the page to demonstrate that the content was updated without the website being opened. So go ahead and open the site. You'll see that the seagull uprising has been received already. And so we go ahead and go online. Yep, that will just tick that one over. So essentially what I've run through, you can see that fetch is being used to run the site while offline. Sync is being used to ensure that the actions that the user sends actually reach the destination, and push is being used to update those alerts on the user's device as they receive those notifications in the background. So that's it for my demo. So from here, I throw to you. I strongly encourage you to get building with service workers. There's a lot you can do with them. And I personally want to see them have more widespread adoption in the industry. Fetch is available on most devices now. You'll have experienced it if you've ever used Google Sheets offline. The other superpowers currently have some limitations on particularly Safari for sync and push events, but I'm hoping with more usage, we can see some vendors adopt these APIs in full. Giving progressive enhancements to your user's experience is always worth it. You can always fall back to what we have now. If you scan that QR code, there's a link to the repo for this demo, as well as some references to get you started. It's also got some honorable mentions to libraries like Workbox that add a bunch of features that make it way more usable to handle these sorts of functionality in websites today with fallbacks as supported by your devices. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and answer any questions that are in the chat.
Sounds good. We've got one from Andrew about Ben, using some sort of reactive libraries for event processing to keep track of those delayed events in the offline mode, Next.js or something like that.
So for this demo, I've tried to keep it as bare bones as possible. Let me just give this some thought though. Reactive libraries, keep track of delayed events in the offline mode. So yeah, something like Next.js for that would be useful. I know that there is a library that exists that's specifically for offline syncing and with Next.js. For this demo, I've just gone ahead and used a hook called use sync external store, which just lets me call a list of subscribers to update the React components as new events come in through the background. Let me just go ahead and grab that.
Actually, it might be worth posting the link to your repo if it's public as well.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just chuck that in there. But essentially, just to keep things as light as possible, I've gone ahead and just implemented it with the bare bones of service workers, just for demonstration. But practically, you would probably want to be using something like Workbox to handle some of those gaps. But it's important to understand how it actually works under the hood in case you need to debug anything. So yeah, the Google library I mentioned is a tool called Workbox. And essentially, it's a wrapper on top of all these technologies. I found personally when I went on this journey of finding out more information about service workers, a lot of the resources on the internet point to Workbox libraries because they are so useful, but I found not a lot of resources explained what is actually happening on the service worker. All you need to run something with a service worker is just a separate JS file that gets loaded in with a bunch of events registered. And I wanted to try and keep it as bare bones as possible for that reason, to try and make it easier to understand what is actually happening. But yeah, and yeah, thank you for chucking that in the chat there. It's pretty cool. I really like the way that they've done the background sync fallback. It's pretty impressive.
We got any more questions from the audience? Let's see. Maybe everyone's questioned out. Yeah, I'll hide that. All right. Well, thank you very much for the talk, Ben. That was really good. And it is an area that I've touched on, briefly and not gone into the level of depth that you could do in the short talk. So it's quite good to see real example of how you can use it and bring all the parts together and the realistic fallbacks and things like that to cover Safari and make it usable then across the board. So I really enjoyed it. You got any comments, Francis, at the end?
I just actually wrote that it's been a concise and a rather compelling talk.
We've had a few great talk comments and awesome talk, very concise.
Yeah, I think concise is such a strong word here, because we always, all our talks are normally overrun. So yeah.
No, I thought it was best to get. I personally have a bias. The reason why I wrote this talk in the first place is because I want to see a lot of these tools being adopted more widely, and to keep it nice, short, simple, and sweet, and provide options to have progressive enhancements. Was my selfish way of trying to encourage people to slap these into apps you're working on. But yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to talk as well.
Oh, no, it's
hopefully you'll be back one day.
Definitely our pleasure. Yeah,
absolutely. You're more than welcome to come back anytime. If you got any talks you want to try out on an audience, I think the alt.net crowd would be more than.
We're very happy to hear from you again.
Thank you.
All right. I guess we'll go to questions for the audience now. Everyone ready? I'll take that silence as a yes, because people can't really reply quickly. All right. So tell me, for one JetSbrain license, what are two of we better hide the slides. Hang on. We'll hide the slides. Here we go. Too easy with the slides. Oh, hang on. We got one more question from Steve before we go into the JetBrains. A question for Ben again. So any issues with running in development mode?
Yes. So because of the nature of service workers, especially with replaying your offline first pages, you need to there's a bunch of little workarounds you can do to make sure you can actually run it in development mode. So if you look at the repo, you'll notice that my service worker is being served from an entry file, which just imports the service worker from elsewhere in my structure. And that's because you can register a service worker at any path in your URL. But if you want to use it at a higher path than the path that it's down, it has to be located on that location relative. And so I ran into an issue where I was registering it in development mode and it was being lifted up. But when I actually ran in production, it was not, because it was at a lower point. The other thing is, if you are modifying your service worker in development mode, if the way that the browser decides whether or not to refetch and re-register a service worker is if it detects any change in the service worker at all. So it probably under the hood runs something like just a hash on the file and checks to see if it is different. So one of the tricks you can do in development mode to make sure it's always up to date is to just have essentially a key that gets regenerated every time something is modified in your file. But yeah, there's a few complications with it, and I imagine, like, as you go further and further into this, you'll run into plenty more. But yeah, have a play around with the repo I've put together. All you need is to just point it to a MongoDB, and it will work. So yes, in summary, yes.
Alan's asking you just to tell us a bit more about dev mode. Yes, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, no worries.
You thought you were off the hook, but all the questions are coming.
I know. No, hit me with them. So I guess in this context, it's just running your web app locally. And so there are a few pieces that are different running locally versus when you've hosted them. Like a good example is subscribing to notifications is a bit different as well. But yeah, dev mode. But yeah, I guess with the site, we have a bunch of files that are bundled and deployed and hosted just as static assets, and then a serverless function that just replies to the request that I'm sending from the front end. And so that's quite different from when I run it locally, which is a whole bunch of files, not bundled locally, that have to be hot reloaded, as well as the service work itself, which is being imported differently between running it locally and running it from prod. So essentially, it's just a mode running it locally.
Fair enough. Is that any other follow-up question, Alan? Are you happy with that? There you go. You got a thanks. So I think it's clear.
Figma sent a cease and desist letter to Lovable over the term dev mode. I am pretty sure this has existed well before Figma has existed, but
developers have been around a while.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. All
right. Well, I suppose we'll go back to the questions to the audience, because the audience has had their turn to ask questions now. So yes, tell me, what are 2 superpowers that were mentioned during the talk for one JetBrains license? First correct answer gets it. Wow, Sarah did very quickly. There you go. I think that's a clear win. Here you go. Fetch and push. Sorry, everyone else, but there is one more question, so you have another go. Yeah, Sarah. So send me. I'm sure I've got your email somewhere, but just send me an email. Sorry, I mean, if you don't have my email, send me a meetup message with your email address, and I'll send you the license. And all right, for the next question. All right, please give me a 1-sentence explanation of what sync does. Can't use ChatGPT, too slow. You have to do it. You have to do it out of human recall. Francis, you don't need a license. And we have an answer. Let's see. Sync is used for queuing messages when the network's not available. That sounds pretty good. Are you happy with that as an answer?
Yeah, that's good. Nice, concise answer.
It's pretty good. You didn't use AI for that, right? Did you?
I feel like AI probably wouldn't have thrown the term sidekick in there at the end.
Yes, not unless you prompted it. That was pretty fast. I think the speed is something that allows us to stay ahead of the AIs for the moment for this sort of stuff. Very good. All right. So I'm sure I don't think I've got your email. So please send me a meetup message with your email address, and I'll send you the second license. And that is all we have to give away today, I think. Francis, we don't have anything else, right?
No. I guess, I don't know. What can I
No t-shirts,
say?
no beer. No.
Yeah, I don't have any freebies to offer.
No, that's it. All right. Well, again, if anyone has got something that they want to talk about, send Francis or me an email or a message or whatever. Alan's after your headset.
They're not my headset. They belong to the company. So
there you go. Otherwise, Francis would give away anything he owned, but he can't give away his company's headset. Sorry. Of course.
Yeah, they're actually pretty good headsets, actually.
So if anyone does have a talk that they'd like to give, then we do have a few booked in for the next few months, but we can certainly find you a spot. So let us know. Can you remember off the top of your head, Francis, what the next topic is for next month? Testing.
I think it's our good old friend. What's his name?
Hang on.
Yeah, the one you had lunch with.
Oh, we've got Alexis coming.
Alexi.
So he's going to be talking about the reactive programming. So actually some more JavaScript stuff, in fact. Who needs AI? You can still talk about JavaScript and front-end development. Very good. It looks like I think we had some comments earlier that that people didn't want AI talks for a little while, having had like 3 in a row. So yes, we've got a few non-AI talks, but I think the next one after that could be an AI talk again.
Yeah, there is one coming, but I think I have deliberately not lined anything up. I did actually ask one person, but
I think we have one.
Yeah.
So that was June. So July. I think we might have a tentative talk for that one. Yes, and then we've got emu wars and things. But anyway, you can see these on the meetup site, and I'm sure you're not planning your calendar that far ahead. But yes, if you've still got a talk that you'd like to give, we will find you a spot. All right. So thank you everyone very much, and especially Ben for talking and sharing his wisdom. So we'll just end the stream now. If you want to stick around, Ben, we can have a brief chat afterwards as well. So
beautiful.
Cool. All right.
Yep.
See you later. Bye.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.